Have you ever counted the rings? 1, 2, 3, then a hang-up that leaves a breath where the voice should be. I used to think silence was neutral. In Atlanta, in a one-bedroom that watched the freight yard glow like a patient constellation, I learned that silence has a shape. It lives in the seconds between connection and confession, in the way a phone rests face down and hopes the table will keep its secrets. I am Evan Rhodes, and I make timelines for a living. I work in operations at a logistics company where everything is a clock. Pallets, drivers, bill of lading numbers, inventory turns. You cannot lie to a truck. It either arrives or it doesn't. I thought marriage would be like that. Then I learned that people can arrive and still not be there. Mira Dalton and I met when a hurricane stranded us in the same terminal for 6 hours, and the vending machine decided we were hungry. We married 2 years later with a courthouse judge who wore kindness like a tie. We did not take many photos. We said we wanted to live forward instead of curating backward. I meant that. I mean it still, even now, when the past keeps texting me at odd hours with a number I recognize too well. Colt Avery sells solutions for a telecom vendor that services half the warehouses in a 100-mile radius. He shakes hands with facility managers and tells stories about bandwidth like he invented it. He is charming in a way that always feels budgeted. Mira coordinates events for corporate partners, walkthroughs, demos, hospitality suites at trade shows where the coffee is bold and the promises are bolder. They met at an expo where the escalators never stopped carrying people who weren't going anywhere. The first time I noticed 3 rings and a hang-up, I thought it was the network doing what networks do when they're tired. The second time, I wrote it down. The third time, I was in bed pretending to sleep when Mira whispered that she had to check a venue's load-in policy and stepped into the hall. I watched our ceiling fan turn responsibility into circles. When she came back, she put her phone face down as if the table owed her discretion. I almost laughed. Then I didn't. No photos, no witnesses. Only a sound that learned my schedule and arrived when I wasn't ready. I am not a detective. I am a man who believes in documents the way some people believe in prayer. So I opened a notebook and dated the page. I wrote rings and put a small box I could fill in later when the story decided what it wanted to be. Atlanta is a city of lanes, and even when you stay in yours, you can feel the pressure of other people changing theirs. At work, I measured dwell time at the docks and tried not to measure the distance between Mira and me when she sat on the opposite end of the couch and learned the art of being busy at the right times. She had always been good at logistics in heels. Now she was good at giving the present an alibi. I did not touch her phone. I did not shadow her, did not stake out restaurants, did not click through tags to see which mirror might have caught us both forgetting. I made coffee and lists and pretended the two were the same thing. When I tried to ask a question, the words queued up like trucks at a way station and discovered they were overweight. One night I woke to the soft glow of a screen. The lock screen showed a calendar alert. Vendor check-in, 10:30 p.m. It is a skill to label something so bland that even suspicion loses interest. I rolled over, water in my chest. Mira leaned over and kissed my shoulder like a refund for something I hadn't bought. Pain doesn't want glory. It wants a policy. So I called a lawyer, not the kind that chases headlines, the kind that writes careful letters. Her name is Amara Voss, and she speaks like a metronome with a heart. I told her what I had and what I didn't. She asked me to breathe. She said, "Tell me only what you can swear to and what paper already knows." I told her about the rings, about the calendar, about Colt's laugh that sounds like a well-funded plan. She listened the way a nurse listens to a complaint that doesn't know its own symptoms yet. "Do not confront," she said. "Do not guess. If there is a story here, we'll let the records write it." She explained things I had only read in articles and never wanted to need. Preservation letters, subpoenas, the difference between content and non-content, under a law with a name that sounds like a drawer, Stored Communications Act. We cannot get message contents from a carrier by subpoena in civil court, she said. But we can request call detail records, billing, subscriber information. We can ask the court to require production. We will do it clean, or we will not do it. I asked what clean costs. She said, less than the alternative. It starts with a letter. Amara drafted a preservation notice addressed to Colt's carrier and Mira's, asking them to preserve call detail records, billing, subscriber data, and any available non-content logs for a window of months. She sent similar letters to the event venues where Mira said she was coordinating. If you've never seen your life summarized in a paragraph with a case caption at the top, I do not recommend it except as medicine. It is an X-ray. Clinical, grayscale, undeniable. We filed for dissolution. Georgia doesn't require anyone to be the villain. That didn't interest me. What I needed was a timeline that wouldn't look away. Amara prepared a subpoena under Rule 45. Surgical, limited in scope, tight on dates and numbers, respectful of burdens. She warned me the carriers might object, might narrow, might require us to reframe, until the ask sounded like a library request instead of a raid. While we waited, I did something I could do without anyone's permission. I obtained my own records. My carrier delivered them in a PDF that looked like a novel no one had edited. Lines of calls with durations like beadwork. I highlighted the weeks that hurt and watched blue lines appear like veins on the page. I traced the times I called Mira and the calls that bounced because an unknown number had gotten there first. Theo Rusk, a friend who writes about cities and secrets, texted to ask if I wanted to walk the Beltline and borrow his silence. We walked, and he didn't interview me. He asked how the coffee at my new place tasted and whether I had figured out the train whistle schedule yet. When I told him I was counting rings, he nodded like that was a hobby a man might have. Metadata is heavy, he said. It shouldn't be, but it is. At night, I lay in bed and listened to the power lines hum the way an old TV hums in a memory you can't stop replaying. I thought of Colt and his solutions. I thought of Mira arranging a table so a bad conversation could sit somewhere soft. I thought of the way love sometimes uses logistics to forget what it promised to deliver. Then I closed my eyes and counted rings instead of sheep. 1, 2, 3, click. It is not a bedtime story. It is a ledger that refuses to hallucinate a fairy tale for you. The carriers responded the way large organizations respond. Politely, slowly, and with a love for procedure that felt like religion. One set of records arrived first. Billing summaries for Mira's number and the account holder information she had given the carrier. It told me nothing I didn't already know, except that my life's perimeter was 2 pages long. Amara smiled at the envelopes like a chess player forced to open with a pawn. We're building custody, she said. We're building patience. Then the call detail records came in a format only an optimist could call friendly. CSV files with headers that judged you for not remembering what CLD and ANI stood for. Amara brought in Dr. Celine Park, a forensic telecom analyst who looked at the world like it owed her math. She wore glasses, no drama, and she said, "Hello," as if kindness were an input. She took the records and fed them into a tool that turned rows into patterns. We won't need tower data unless they fight the obvious, she said. Let's start with frequency, duration, and time of day clustering. Celine charted calls from Mira's number to a contact saved as CA. The initials are not evidence. The behavior is. Between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. on weeknights, a pattern emerged. 3 short rings, hang up, then a longer call from Colt's number to Mira's 4 minutes later. A choreography of caution. Weekends showed bursts around noon, the lunch hour that smart people reserve for things they know aren't wise. The totals meant nothing alone. The timeline made them sing. "Look here," Cellini said, tracing blue highlighter across printouts. "The night your timeline says, vendor check-in, there's a call at 10:32 p.m., duration 004712. The same number appears the next night for 0039:55. Then 2 days later, 0001:43. That's the tell." "What is?" I asked. "The 1-minute 43-second call. It's a key exchange, planning for presence. Short enough to be plausible, long enough to finish a sentence the long call started." I nodded like I understood. Maybe I did. The math felt like a confession you could print. Celine explained chain of custody like a teacher explaining knives to someone who likes bread. We received these files directly from the carrier via counsel, logged with date and time, preserved hash values, and we're working on printed subsets for hearing with certification, in case. We keep originals. We annotate copies. We do not break the seal because we enjoy sleep. I could have loved her for that sentence. I settled for gratitude. She asked for my own call logs to compare. I sent them. She mapped my calls against Mira's like two rivers that used to share a delta and now sometimes flood out of sync. On the nights I called and received no answer, Mira's number was already braided to Colt's. The timeline didn't accuse. It just didn't lie. Amara scheduled a case management conference. Neil Carrington, opposing counsel, filed a motion to quash parts of the subpoena as overbroad and intrusive, which is lawyer for, "You asked for things we don't want to see the light." Amara responded with a brief that read like a polite refusal to be called impolite. She limited requests. She cited relevance. She added a note about non-content data. "This is not a fishing expedition. It is a map to a shore already sighted." Mira moved into a friend's townhouse near Inman Park. We used a shared spreadsheet to keep track of rent and utilities like we were roommates in a sitcom whose laugh track had been mercifully turned off. We didn't fight because exhaustion gets bored of fighting. We texted about groceries and left feelings in the draft folder where they couldn't cause trouble. When I saw her, she looked like someone who had rehearsed a better life and couldn't remember the lines on opening night. Theo sent me a link to a long piece about the heaviness of metadata and the ridiculousness of pretending it is light. He didn't add commentary. He knew I had enough. I read it anyway. I highlighted a sentence. "The pattern becomes the witness." I copied it into my notebook and wrote, "Remember." Cellini produced a report with 3 sections: methodology, findings, implications. It was blessedly dull until it wasn't. In a table that treated my heart like a spreadsheet, she listed date, time, duration, originating number, terminating number. She added context markers, MC call unanswered, and vendor check-in calendar item, and hotel booking derived from bank record. In the rightmost column, she printed numbers in blue to show night clusters. It looked like weather. It was weather. A storm I had pretended would pass had set up residency. We met with Amara to rehearse what could become testimony if the case grew teeth. She prepared me for questions I didn't want asked. "Did you ever look at her phone?" "No." "Did you install any software, trackers, or recording devices?" "No." "Did you ask mutual friends for screenshots?" "No." "Did you ever confront Mr. Avery?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I was building a case that could stand up without leaning on rage." "Good," she said. "We are not punishing. We are apportioning truth." Neil proposed mediation. Amara said yes because that is what you say when you're not trying to win a movie. She briefed me on offers and anchors and the price of pretending. She warned me that sometimes people need a story more than they need a solution. If we can give them a solution that feels like a story, she said, that's justice's best day. In the parking garage, I sat in my car until the engine forgot it was alive. I stared at my phone and did not call Mira. I called Theo. He said, "Tell me something ordinary about your day." I said, "A driver named Bryant returned a pallet jack without being asked." He said, "That's sainthood." We laughed until we had a reason to keep going. The mediation took place in a building with too much glass and not enough air. The mediator had a voice designed to make people feel their worst ideas were welcome to visit, but would be asked to leave by midnight. Neil arrived with Mira an arm's length behind him, a choreography they both pretended was coincidence. Amara touched my elbow like a promise that could afford to be modest. We sat in different rooms and sent numbers through the corridors like carrier pigeons that had taken a couple of continuing legal education courses. We were not far apart, until we were. Neil argued the records proved nothing beyond frequency. Amara replied that frequency is the shape of choice. He said there was no content, no pictures, no witness. She said the call patterns corroborated the breakdown, affected allocation, and established dissipation. He said emotion. She said evidence. The mediator said lunch. After lunch, Celine joined by video. She shared her screen and painted our months in blue. She explained the nightly choreography, the weekend bursts, the 1-minute, 43-second planning calls. She spoke softly. She sounded tired and sure. The mediator watched the lines the way a person watches rain decide whether to stay rain or become hail. Neil argued the times could be about work. Celine zoomed out to a 30-day view and showed that work did not learn to hide in the same corners week after week. Then came the first major twist. Amara produced a letter from Colt's carrier, belatedly cooperative, confirming subscriber details and a change of billing notice that placed Colt at a corporate apartment near a venue Mira had booked on 3 of the nights at issue. It did not say affair. It said address. Sometimes those words are cousins with strong family resemblance. Mira's face flickered when she saw the page. I couldn't read the flicker. Pity is a dangerous hobby. I looked at the table instead. The mediator said we should all take a break. I walked to the elevator bank and counted the rings of a phone I didn't have the heart to call. 1, 2, 3, hang up. You start to wonder if the sound can tell time by you. The second major twist arrived in a form that would be funny in a different universe. A calendar invite forwarded inadvertently by a venue manager to Amara, confirming a private walkthrough for Colt and Mira with an access code after hours. The manager apologized immediately and said they'd intended it for a colleague. Amara had not asked for it. It traveled to us as accidents travel, because reality is sometimes bored of subtlety. Neil went very still. The mediator went very quiet. I went to the window and looked at a city trying to be brave about its traffic. Amara did not gloat. She arranged her pens. She asked for coffee. Then she made an offer that sounded like adulthood. Neil whispered with Mira for 10 minutes. That took 20. He came back with a number that looked like an apology with a calculator attached. Amara said we were closer. Selene logged off with a wave that blessed the room without being weird about it. We did not settle that day. It wasn't about money. It was about belonging to a version of yourself you could live with next week. The mediators set another date and told us not to do anything theatrical in the meantime. I appreciated the instruction. I wasn't in the mood for theater. I was in the mood for a sandwich that didn't taste like an argument. Days blur when your life becomes a docket. I ran before work and tried to outrun the numbers. They ran faster. At the warehouse, I approved overtime and imagined fairness had a punch clock. At night, I sorted mail into piles named Now, Soon, and Wrong Address. Recovery is clerical work before it is mercy. Then the third major twist arrived, carrying its own lighting. Amara received a production from Mira's counsel that included texts between Mira and a mutual friend, redacted for content but time-stamped. Content is private. The timestamps aren't. On 3 of the nights I had marked with blue highlighter. The redacted texts clustered just before and after the long calls with Colt. The pattern doubled itself in a mirror. Neil had produced it to argue the calls were supportive during a difficult work period. Patterns are stubborn. They refuse to audition for that role. Amara prepared me for the possibility of a brief evidentiary hearing if we couldn't close in mediation. "We don't need spectacle," she said. "We need sufficient." She outlined how Celine would authenticate the records. Carrier custodian declarations, hash values, processing notes. She practiced questions with me until my answers stopped apologizing for existing. "Did you ever consider breaking the law to obtain proof?" "No." "Why?" "Because love is not a crime scene you get to contaminate for a better story." Theo sent me a photo of a payphone he'd found in a bar that served nostalgia neat. It had graffiti that said, "Call your mother," which is good advice and a terrible plan at 1 a.m. I texted him back, 3 rings. He wrote, "Pick up for yourself." I tried. I slept. I woke at 3:17 a.m., mind ringing without a number to call. On the morning of the second mediation, rain convinced the sky to act like a faucet instead of a personality. We sat in the same rooms. The coffee tasted like resignation. The mediator looked at us as if we were students who had promise but poor study habits. Amara presented a revised term sheet that reflected the call records, the venue invite, the address notice, and the redacted timestamp cluster. She did not use the word adultery. She used the phrase conduct contributing to the dissolution and allocation. People underestimate how much work those words can do. Neil argued about optics. Amara argued about math. Mira watched me the way you watch a person's hands when they learn they're done holding something. Then she said she wanted to speak to me alone, and the mediator allowed it because sometimes mercy requires a small breach of procedure. We stood in the hallway by the window where water made a blurred city of the real one. Mira said, "Do you hate me?" I said, "I'm tired." She said, "That sounds like no." I said, "It sounds like triage." We stood there remembering how to stand near each other without catching fire. "I don't want a trial," she said. "I don't want the transcript of my worst month." I said, "Then let's not have one." She laughed in a way that broke a cup I had been balancing. "You always were good at the obvious," she said. "You always were good at hiding in it," I said. We both smiled and were pretty for 6 seconds. She asked if I would agree not to name Colt in any public filing. I said I would agree not to make our private nouns into public hashtags. I said names aren't as heavy as patterns anyway. She said she was sorry. I said I knew. I said I was sorry for the ways I had been easier to talk around than to. We gave each other credit we couldn't spend. Then we went back to our rooms and tried to end like adults. We settled by dinner. The number reflected the calls without calling them everything they were. The timeline received respect. The ledger closed. We signed a memorandum that never said the words people want these stories to say. It said other words that keep people from becoming worse versions of themselves. Mutual confidentiality, non-disparagement, allocation in light of conduct, no admission, finality. Afterward, I walked into rain that had decided to be silver instead of gray. Theo called and didn't ask how it went. He asked if I wanted gumbo. I said yes. He said, "I'll see you in 20." The city was still wet when we finished eating. We didn't talk about rings. We talked about baseball and bicycles and a bakery that was either closing or reinventing itself. I went home and slept long enough to believe it might be a habit. Release doesn't knock. It just lets the door feel lighter. The week after settlement, I cleaned out the hall closet and found a shoebox of cords we no longer owned devices for. I wrote Grace on the lid in Sharpie and put it by the curb. Someone took it before I could wonder whether anyone would. Celine emailed a final chain of custody summary for the file and wished me quiet weekends. I wrote back that I planned to learn how to waste time without being punished by it. Amara closed our matter with a letter that sounded like a hand on a shoulder. "You did this the hard way on purpose," she wrote. "That makes the easy parts later possible." I printed the letter and put it in a folder labeled After. No, Mira texted me a photo of the dog she was fostering. He looked like a retired linebacker who believed in naps. She said he snores like freight. I said that was the sexiest description of sleep I'd heard all year. We sent emojis that were neither ironic nor flirty. We meant kindness and sent images because words are heavier than they look. At work, I taught a new analyst how to build a timeline that respects both what happened and the part where we admit we might be wrong about some of it. She learned quickly. People do when the work knows what it is for. I watched a truck back into Bay 4 without touching the bumpers and thought about how much dignity there is in alignment that nobody applauds. On Sundays, I run the belt line and pretend I am a metronome someone forgot to turn off. The city hums. Construction cranes try to make grace out of steel. Cyclists ding bells with a courtesy that sounds like small mercy. I count dogs because dogs are statistics that can be trusted to be better than you were yesterday. When I pass the section where you can see the trains, I say hello to anything headed somewhere. One last thing, because endings are the only place the truth doesn't interrupt. The records did not fix me. They did not punish her. They did not turn Colt into a cautionary tale anybody else will read. They turned the fog into a road. They let two adults end a thing without taking a torch to the building just to see the paperwork catch fire. They were enough, and enough turns out to be a miracle we underrate. If you are holding a phone in the dark and wondering whether not having a photo means you do not have a story, I want to lay this down where you can't ignore it. If betrayal leaves no pictures and invites no witnesses, but the phone records draw a timeline that doesn't flinch, and you follow that line with subpoenas and patience instead of rage, does the justice feel smaller or finally big enough to live with? That is my question to you and to the part of me that still counts rings. That is my CTA, the only one I will allow myself. I will not ask you to like or share. I will ask you to breathe. Back at home, my phone buzzes with a spam call from a city I have never visited. I let it ring 3 times and hang up. The kitchen light is soft on the counter. I take a blue highlighter and draw a line across a page I no longer need. Numbers do not lie. People try not to. The line dries. The silence returns. This time it does not need to say anything to be kind. Word count. I started cooking dishes that insist on supervision. Roux that punishes distraction, polenta that asks for the humility of stirring. Recipes are clauses that name prices. Whisk constantly, do not scorch, remove from heat and wait. And when I keep those bargains, the kitchen offers absolution measured in steam. In a thrift store on Ponce, I found a used answering machine that still worked. I pressed play and listened to strangers from a decade ago apologize to other strangers. Even their hesitations sounded familiar. I put the machine back. Some antiques deserve a museum. Some deserve a gentle, private extinction. On a bench at Piedmont Park, Theo told me the trick for long grief is to write thank you notes to small moments. A fast green light, a good pair. A seat on the MARTA when your knees lied about their mood. I wrote 3 notes that afternoon and mailed none. Amara invited me to a CLE talk where a judge said, "The point of rules is not to win. It is to keep the losses survivable." People took notes. I didn't. I looked at the ceiling and counted light panels until I could name the shape of their mercy. Selena sent a photo from a lab, a printout under a paperweight shaped like a tower. She had written, "Sleep well," in the margin. I slept. I replaced the default ringtone with a soft chime that sounds like a cautious friend. When it rings 3 times, I breathe twice on purpose before deciding whether to answer. It is a ritual that has nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with choosing. Mira texted a screenshot of the dog adoption papers. She named him Ledger. I laughed in a way that didn't break anything and sent a thumbs up that meant more than approval. She replied with a photo of Ledger asleep on the couch. The caption said, "He trusts the house." On a hot night that threatened rain and delivered it, I stood under the awning of a corner store while lightning practiced its calligraphy. A woman beside me said, "It always does this right before it stops." She might have meant the weather. She might have meant what we mean when we say we're fine. I learned which friends like to leave long voicemails and which prefer to hang up after 3 rings so the sound doesn't have to take responsibility for the conversation. I listened to both and let the machine in my chest sort them by tenderness. When the settlement cleared and the accounts rebalanced, I bought 2 new bath towels and threw away one that had learned too much. The new ones were heavy and thirsty. I took a long shower and noticed that water, unlike words, does not hold a grudge. I started cooking dishes that insist on supervision. Roux that punishes distraction, polenta that asks for the humility of stirring. Recipes are clauses that name prices. Whisk constantly, do not scorch, remove from heat and weight. And when I keep those bargains, the kitchen offers absolution measured in steam. In a thrift store on Ponce, I found a used answering machine that still worked. I pressed play and listened to strangers from a decade ago apologize to other strangers. Even their hesitation sounded familiar. I put the machine back. Some antiques deserve a museum. Some deserve a gentle, private extinction. On a bench at Piedmont Park, Theo told me the trick for long grief is to write thank you notes to small moments. A fast green light, a good pair, a seat on the MARTA when your knees lied about their mood. I wrote 3 notes that afternoon and mailed none. Amara invited me to a CLE talk where a judge said, "The point of rules is not to win. It is to keep the losses survivable." People took notes. I didn't. I looked at the ceiling and counted light panels until I could name the shape of their mercy. Celine sent a photo from a lab, a printout under a paperweight shaped like a tower. She had written, "Sleep well," in the margin. I slept. I replaced the default ringtone with a soft chime that sounds like a cautious friend. When it rings 3 times, I breathe twice on purpose before deciding whether to answer. It is a ritual that has nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with choosing. Mira texted a screenshot of the dog adoption papers. She named him Ledger. I laughed in a way that didn't break anything and sent a thumbs up that meant more than approval. She replied with a photo of Ledger asleep on the couch. The caption said, "He trusts the house." On a hot night that threatened rain and delivered it, I stood under the awning of a corner store while lightning practiced its calligraphy. A woman beside me said, "It always does this right before it stops." Ars She might have meant the weather. She might have meant what we mean when we say we're fine. I learned which friends like to leave long voicemails and which prefer to hang up after 3 rings so the sound doesn't have to take responsibility for the conversation. I listened to both and let the machine in my chest sort them by tenderness. When the settlement cleared and the accounts rebalanced, I bought 2 new bath towels and threw away one that had learned too much. The new ones were heavy and thirsty. I took a long shower and noticed that water, unlike words, does not hold a grudge. I started cooking dishes that insist on supervision, roux that punishes distraction, polenta that asks for the humility of stirring. Recipes are clauses that name prices. Whisk constantly, do not scorch, remove from heat and wait. And when I keep those bargains, the kitchen offers absolution measured in steam. In a thrift store on Ponce, I found a used answering machine that still worked. I pressed play and listened to strangers from a decade ago apologize to other strangers. Even their hesitation sounded familiar. I put the machine back. Some antiques deserve a museum. Some deserve a gentle, private extinction. On a bench at Piedmont Park, Theo told me the trick for long grief is to write thank you notes to small moments. A fast green light, a good pair, a seat on the MARTA when your knees lied about their mood. I wrote 3 notes that afternoon and mailed none. Amara invited me to a CLE talk where a judge said, "The point of rules is not to win. It is to keep the losses survivable." People took notes. I didn't. I looked at the ceiling and counted light panels until I could name the shape of their mercy. Celine sent a photo from a lab, a printout under a paperweight shaped like a tower. She had written, "Sleep well," in the margin. I slept. I replaced the default ringtone with a soft chime that sounds like a cautious friend. When it rings 3 times, I breathe twice on purpose before deciding whether to answer. It is a ritual that has nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with choosing. Mira texted a screenshot of the dog adoption papers. She named him Ledger. I laughed in a way that didn't break anything and sent a thumbs up that meant more than approval. She replied with a photo of Ledger asleep on the couch. The caption said, "He trusts the house." On a hot night that threatened rain and delivered it, I stood under the awning of a corner store while lightning practiced its calligraphy. A woman beside me said, "It always does this right before it stops." She might have meant the weather. She might have meant what we mean when we say we're fine. I learned which friends like to leave long voicemails and which prefer to hang up after 3 rings so the sound doesn't have to take responsibility for the conversation. I listened to both and let the machine in my chest sort them by tenderness. When the settlement cleared and the accounts rebalanced, I bought 2 new bath towels and threw away one that had learned too much. The new ones were heavy and thirsty. I took a long shower and noticed that water, unlike words, does not hold a grudge. I started cooking dishes that insist on supervision, roux that punishes distraction, polenta that asks for the humility of stirring. Recipes are clauses that name prices. Whisk constantly, do not scorch, remove from heat and wait. And when I keep those bargains, the kitchen offers absolution measured in steam. In a thrift store on Ponce, I found a used answering machine that still worked. I pressed play and listened to strangers from a decade ago apologize to other strangers. Even their hesitations sounded familiar. I put the machine back. Some antiques deserve a museum. Some deserve a gentle, private extinction. On a bench at Piedmont Park, Theo told me the trick for long grief is to write thank you notes to small moments. A fast green light, a good pair, a seat on the MARTA when your knees lied about their mood. I wrote 3 notes that afternoon and mailed none. Amara invited me to a CLE talk where a judge said, "The point of rules is not to win. It is to keep the losses survivable. People took notes. I didn't. I looked at the ceiling and counted light panels until I could name the shape of their mercy. Celine sent a photo from a lab. A printout under a paperweight shaped like a tower. She had written, "Sleep well," in the margin. I slept. I replaced the default ringtone with a soft chime that sounds like a cautious friend. When it rings 3 times, I breathe twice on purpose before deciding whether to answer. It is a ritual that has nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with choosing. Mira texted a screenshot of the dog adoption papers. She named him Ledger. I laughed in a way that didn't break anything and sent a thumbs up that meant more than approval. She replied with a photo of Ledger asleep on the couch. The caption said, "He trusts the house." On a hot night that threatened rain and delivered it, I stood under the awning of a corner store while lightning practiced its calligraphy. A woman beside me said, "It always does this right before it stops." She might have meant the weather. She might have meant what we mean when we say we're fine. I learned which friends like to leave long voicemails and which prefer to hang up after 3 rings so the sound doesn't have to take responsibility for the conversation. I listened to both and let the machine in my chest sort them by tenderness. When the settlement cleared and the accounts rebalanced, I bought 2 new bath towels and threw away one that had learned too much. The new ones were heavy and thirsty. I took a long shower and noticed that water, unlike words, does not hold a grudge. 6118